You're listening to the Business Marketing Show episode number 14. You can find us at businessmarketingshow.com or on iTunes.
Hi everyone, welcome to Business Marketing Show. This is Ed from Online Impact and I am with my co-host Brendan Tully from the Search Engine Shop. How are you, Brendan?
I'm good, Ed. How are you this morning?
I'm good, just getting over a cold, so apologies to people who think I sound a little bit nasally. That's because I do. And I'm also testing a new microphone today, so, you know, I've got to experiment occasionally. So how you been?
Yeah, good. It's been quite a busy week. So, looking forward to the weekend, I guess.
Yes, the weekend is upon us. Hooray! So, we are going to talk about today, Brendan, hosting and the different aspects that you should be looking for with hosting and how it is really, really, really important to have good quality hosting for your business website. So, take it away, sir.
So, I guess before the show we talked about this quickly. For me, so getting traffic to the website, doing work to improve that website, it's all good and well, but everything's kind of built on this foundation of hosting. So because it's technical and most people aren't familiar with it, it kind of gets ignored. And I see a lot of problems with client sites because it's on poor quality or cheap hosting. People don't understand the difference between a $5 a month hosting plan and a $100 a month hosting plan, but there is a big difference. So I want to talk today about, some of the hosting basics. So the way I explain hosting is broken down into 4 components. We'll talk about the providers that we both use and recommend, and probably some action steps as well in terms of getting people to, or what the listener can do in terms of looking at their own hosting and seeing whether that's adequate enough or not.
Yep. Okay.
Make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Go for it.
Cool. Okay, so let's run through the 4 components of hosting, or the 4 main components of hosting first, and then we can dig into each one. So we have domain names. So you buy domain names from your domain registrar. And then you have DNS hosting. So the internet runs on numbers, not web addresses. So what DNS hosting does is turn those web addresses into IP addresses. So it's very important. Then you have web hosting, which is what the website runs on top of. And then you have email hosting, which is where your email is hosted.
Okay.
So let's talk about the first one, domain names. Your favorite topic?
My favorite topic, yeah. Basically, the name that people can relate to that is attached to that DNS or the number. So that would just be businessmarketingshow.com as an example. So people remember that, they type that in, that's connected through your DNS settings. It takes it through to your hosting where your website sits and where your email is typically operating from as well. So your domain name can be based in, it can be a .com, it could be a .com.au, .co.uk, wherever you live. There's usually an extension for your country, or you can have other extensions like some of the new ones that are coming out like .club, .xyz, .media, and there's thousands of others, well, hundreds of others coming out. So
we talked about domain names in episode 4.
Yep.
But I guess again, so who are the registrars that you use?
I use several, and it just really depends on the domain extension that I'm getting. In Australia, I use a company called drop.com.au. I use those to get my names for .com.au and .net.au. Sometimes I'll also use another company called cheapdomains.com.au. There's other ones owned by the same company, actually. It's crazydomains.com.au. Everyone's probably seen those. There's GoDaddy. I don't use them anymore, but a lot of people do if they're overseas or in the US, quite popular with people in that part of the world. There's another company called lnc.co.uk. They are .co.uk registrars, and the new extension .uk, and there's lots of others, but they're the main ones that I use. for people who are listening in the US. Also, namecheap.com. I've got quite a few domains with them as well.
Sure. And is there a difference in quality between registrars?
Definitely, yeah. In terms of service, in terms of being able to pick up a phone and call companies or registrars to get help with your domains if something's not working properly, or you've had an issue where you thought you had a domain in the system and it isn't there anymore, because believe it or not, people steal domain names. So if you don't have the right things, precautions in place to protect your domains, ruthless people out there can go and hijack your name. So sometimes you need to get on the phone and speak to someone to get things sorted. And a lot of the registrars, when you're paying really cheap amounts of money for your domain name, there's not a lot of backup service, and which also goes with hosting, as we'll come to.
Yeah. So is there anyone, I think I know the answer to this, is there anyone to avoid when it comes to registrars?
Yeah, but I don't think we should say it on the I don't think we should say it on the podcast so we don't get sued. Yeah.
Well, I guess what's a typical price for a domain name? $10 or $20 a year. So it's probably if your registrar charging you more than that, significantly more than that, $50 or $100 a year or more, then you're probably getting ripped off. Would you say?
I would say you are, definitely. And that typically is the scenario that I come across a lot with clients, where they're paying way too much for their domain. So if you're registering a .com.au domain, typically you're paying between $19 to $24 would be sort of in the ballpark. If you're paying more than that, you're getting definitely ripped off, and that's for 2 years registration. A lot of the companies advertise their domains like a .com.au, and they say $14 a year, which sounds cheap to a lot of people, but then they realise that the minimum you have to order it for is 2 years. So there's lots of tricks that go on. And for a .com, you're typically paying between $8 to $10, $12 maybe at the most. Paying more than that, and you're paying too much.
Yep. Okay. And I guess from an action point or takeaway point, it's important that you know who your domain registrar is, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, definitely. You need to be in control of who that is, and if you've got depending on how many domains you've got, if you've only got a few domains, it's you're not going to have any sort of account manager or someone to deal with, but you've got to make sure that it is under your control and your name and details are on the domain name registration. So it's not registered by your IT company or by your person who looks after your computers in any way, or even registered by a staff member. It should be done by you.
Yeah, yep, I'd agree. So the action steps: find out who your domain registrar is, and find out who. I have a client we're building a site for at the moment that the old web company owns all the customer domain names. So if your name isn't set as the domain name owner, you don't actually own it. So whoever that name is or the entity is, they own it. So, and I think particularly as 10 years time, there's going to become a big issue where almost we've already seen it. Yellow Pages is dying. Lots of old school or older forms of advertising are moving to online, which means the value of domain names is only going to go up.
Definitely.
That ownership becomes even more important, particularly. It really is a business asset. So if you're going to sell your business in 10 or 20 years' time and your domain name is still registered to your IT guy, he technically owns that. So that can be a big problem down the road.
Yeah. Too true. Get it sorted.
Sure. Okay, so should we move on to DNS hosting?
We should. What does DNS stand for, Brendan?
So DNS stands for Domain Name System. So this one doesn't get a lot of attention, but it's actually really important. Typically, your IT company will do this, or it will be bundled in with your web hosting, or your domain name registrar will upsell this as part of they're selling you the domain name thing.
Yep.
There's a couple of reasons why this is important. One is reliability, because if your DNS hosting is unreliable or you're with a cheap provider, that means all the rest of your hosting and IT that's public facing is going to be unreliable as well.
Yeah.
So if you're on a $5 or $3 a month hosting plan with someone like Bluehost or HostGator that on one of their super cheap plans, or GoDaddy even, their DNS hosting service is not super reliable. So you're going to have quite a bit of downtime. Now, they might give you an uptime figure of 99% uptime, but that still means that there is 3.5 days of downtime a year, which is huge. So if your email was down for 3.5 days, or even for a whole day, that's mission critical. So it's really important that you're with a high quality DNS provider, that they don't have a lot of outages. Now, second to that, so website performance is really important. So the faster your website loads, the better. Now, slow websites are a problem if they're really slow, because people click away, they're on mobile devices, so it takes too long to load, so they go to the next website. So your website load speed is completely tied into your DNS speed. So the more high performance your DNS hosting is, the faster your website will load. So again, if you're on slow or poor performing, if your DNS hosting is slow and poor performing, then your website's going to be slow. So the only provider we really use for DNS hosting now is Cloudflare. I don't know who you use there, but Cloudflare have a bunch of other services bundled in. They do DNS hosting, they do website security and acceleration, but we will use Cloudflare. They have a free plan even just for the DNS hosting, because I think they're the second fastest DNS hosting provider in the world or something like that. So
okay.
So for bigger websites, speed makes a big difference, right? So if you're getting thousands of visitors a day, small improvements in speed, 1 or 2 seconds, can make a massive difference to sales or inquiries or whatever it is. So often when we take on a new client who has DNS, they might have fast web hosting, but they might have slow DNS. So one of the things we'll do is move their DNS hosting to Cloudflare. We don't necessarily turn on any of the other Cloudflare acceleration features, but just by doing that, it improves the website speed by sometimes 1 or 2 seconds, just because the DNS hosting works faster.
Yeah, and is that going to be affected by where people are living? So do they have to be very cautious what business they're using based on where their main target market is going to be viewing their website from?
Yes and no. With Cloudflare, no, because Cloudflare have a distributed network across the world. So they have servers in all continents. With a traditional DNS hosting provider, yes, because they have typically only 2 DNS hosting servers, and they're both usually in the same country. So, if, for example, if you're with Bluehost, so I'll use them again because they have a cheap $4 or $5 a month plan, and their DNS hosting is quite slow. So if you're with them, their 2 DNS servers are in the US. So particularly if your clients are in Australia, it's going to be even slower. So not just because Bluehost DNS is quite slow already, it's because anytime the website gets loaded up, your computer actually has to go to Bluehost and do that DNS lookup and all that sort of stuff, which the US is a long way away. So
very cool. So Cloudflare is a good one to look at, and you said part of that is is free, but what's the sort of cost per month?
So their base service is completely free. So even so they do 3 things really: DNS hosting, they do website firewalling, and then they do website acceleration. So on their base plan, you get all 3, but often we'll just turn off the acceleration and firewalling because sometimes it conflicts with other things if you have custom software or a checkout. And it's fine. We have, I think, a couple of 100 clients now sitting on top of Cloudflare and never have had a problem or an outage with them, whereas it's a lot more than I can say for a lot of other cheap, poor performing providers.
Yeah, cool. And that's free?
That's free, completely free, $0.
Wow. So where do they make their money, these guys? They must have an upsell of some type.
Yeah, they do. So they have paid plans, but they also do partnering with ISPs because they do acceleration. So a lot of ISPs pay them to put their hardware in their data center because everybody saves money using Cloudflare. So, as a website owner, you save money because there's less traffic hitting your website, and ISPs, they save money because they're pulling the data from a Cloudflare server as opposed to your server. The other good thing about it is because there's multiple people involved in technology, so we do web stuff, but often we have to interact with IT guys. So if the DNS hosting is on one of our servers or if it's on the IT guy's server, we have to constantly ask them to make changes, or they have to ask us to make changes. Whereas with Cloudflare, it's a third party that anyone can log into if they have the logon details and make the changes. So you're kind of not beholden to an IT company or a web company. It's a separate third party. So that's another thing I like about it as well. And they also have two-factor authentication. So the security around logging into Cloudflare, it's optional, but the security around logging into Cloudflare is quite strong. So also important, just like you talked about, people steal domain names, people hack servers to point websites in different places. So it's really important that your DNS hosting is secure as well. So that's another good feature that I like.
Cool.
At Cloudflare.
So after Cloudflare, and they've got that sorted, what next should they be looking for?
So, well, they should, I mean, at the bare minimum, you should know where your DNS hosting is. So that's really the action step there, is for all these is to know where they're hosted and have the logon details and know who's in control of them and who to call if something goes wrong. So DNS hosting, that's kind of covered. Let's talk about web hosting.
Awesome. Let's talk about web hosting. My favourite subject in the world.
Yep. So you go. Tell me about your thoughts on web hosting.
Oh, look, web hosting is one of those things where people do get sucked in by the cheap side of things and go, well, you know, you can get web hosting for $2.95 a month. Why would I pay $40 a month? But they're not really comparing apples with apples in terms of where the servers are for these particular web hosting companies and again, the speed and how many thousands of other people are actually going to be sitting on that shared hosting plan. All sorts of stuff has to be considered when looking at that. And for some, small businesses where they don't have, they're maybe not doing e-commerce or they don't have a high traffic load, it may be a viable option in the early days. But if it's a serious business that's going to get a lot of traffic, you need to have a good quality hosting plan. And the trouble with hosting plans is they can be good today and then 2 years down the track they can be terrible because they're not managed properly and they're overloaded or another company buys them out. So it's always a tricky one. Who is it that you find best at the moment for your web hosting?
So we do our own hosting. So we have a combination of providers we use to provide our hosting. It's like a managed hosting service to clients. So our hosting service is $550 a year, $550 a year.
Yep.
So it's certainly not $3 a month.
No.
There's a couple of major considerations that take into account with the hosting. Like you've talked about, website speed is huge because there's a big difference in how visitors interact with your site if it takes 10 seconds to load versus 1 second to load. And probably one action point here is to do a quick speed test on your website to see how fast it actually loads. If it's taking more than 5 seconds to load, then you're probably losing visitors and losing inquiries. So we'll put a link to a tool where you can check that.
Yep.
So load speed is huge. Like you talked about, on a $3 a month plan, there's going to be 5,000 other businesses using the same server and it's just going to crawl along. Reliability is another one. 99% uptime or even 99.9% uptime is still a day or two of downtime a year, which is massive, particularly if you're like in e-commerce where that site needs to be on 24/7. And also, I guess, backup, the ability to back up the website.
Oh, yeah.
And just some of those extra features around development stuff. So if you're constantly improving a website, particularly if it's a WordPress website, really it's really nice to have a backup capability and some of those extra features that developers like. So we have our own hosting service that's based on top of WP Engine. So for WordPress,
Yep.
We don't really do any other websites outside of WordPress these days. We have some older websites that are on more basic hosting, but then we use Cloudflare in conjunction with that and turn on the Cloudflare acceleration features, which can often cut a second or two out of the load time because some of the stuff is loaded off the Cloudflare servers versus off our server.
Okay. So, So is there your hosting that you're setting up now? Whereabouts is that based? Can you have different choices geographically if you're in Australia or if you're in the US?
Yep. So you can choose, I think, data centers in Singapore, Japan, the US, and Europe. So you can choose where the servers come from.
Yep.
So we use a combination of Cloudflare, WP Engine, and we use Content Delivery Network provided by WP Engine, which is also speeds things up and allows it serves up the content from hundreds of servers across the world. So the website is effectively copied onto a bunch of different servers. So it usually loads up from the data center that's closer to you. So if you're in Australia, the website is either loading up from Sydney or Singapore. If you're in Europe, it's loading up from the UK, that sort of stuff. So
yeah, okay.
for the hosting system that we use, the location doesn't really matter so much. Whereas if you're on a very, a $3 a month hosting plan, there's none of that content delivery stuff or acceleration or, mirroring onto other servers. None of that's included. So if the web server's down, it just doesn't work. So that's another thing I like about Cloudflare as well. They have this feature called Always On. So even if the website's down, often the homepage will still load up and you'll get a message that just says this is a cache version of the website, the server's down for maintenance or something like that. So I absolutely love Cloudflare. It's magic, especially for the price.
Nothing.
Nothing. I had a handful of clients on the paid plan where some of the other better higher end acceleration features make a huge difference or save them a lot of money. But I'm in love with Cloudflare. It's amazing. You got to check it out. If you haven't had a look at it already, you got to have a look at it.
No, we haven't used it, so that's a good tip. See, I learn things on this podcast all the time. So I thought I taught Brendan everything he knows. But apparently not. He's a smart cookie, this Brendan. So what next, buddy?
So that's web hosting. I think as well for backup. So WP Engine do backup. We also, for all our clients, we use the VaultPress. It's another add-on service.
Yeah, that's awesome. WordPress. I love VaultPress.
I think if you have a WordPress site, you need VaultPress. It's provided by Automatic, who created WordPress and all this sort of stuff. I think we talked about this in several other podcasts. So.
Yeah, but it needs to be talked about again because it's to do with backups, and that was in the backup podcast we were talking about. But
that's right.
For $5 a month, for your basic service, I mean, you can go up higher and have more frequency in your backups and things through VaultPress. But just to do a daily backup is what most people are going to need, if they're making changes daily on their website. I know most of my clients aren't making changes daily. It's typically, a couple of times a week, maybe once a week. They're doing, blogs or updating things.
Yep.
So $5 a month, it's an absolute no-brainer. Fully automated backup remotely from any of your systems and servers and, so it's awesome.
Yeah, I must have. I think we're going to see in the next couple of years a lot more stories where websites are getting deleted or hacked and people losing them because they haven't paid attention to website backups. I see them all the time, and it's it's such a shame because you're basically building equity in that website. As your business grows and you're improving it and improving your website rankings, that's tangible equity that's worth money. And like you said, man, $5 a month to protect that is nothing. Whereas, for my business insurance, I'm paying thousands a year. Why wouldn't I have, why is $5 a month a problem for some people? I don't know.
Yeah. So, exactly.
Okay, next. Email hosting.
Mm-hmm.
This is an interesting one.
Yes.
I think it's kind of one that's sneaked up on many people and they haven't realized that in today's world, 5 years ago it was a different scenario, but today's world, I think email is mission critical. I don't think you can be down on your email can't be down for more than a few hours a day without having it seriously affect your business or the productivity of your business. What do you think?
I definitely agree. Yeah. I get my knickers in a twist if I have any email problems. So you can't have it. It's just as important as your website being live, in my opinion.
Yep, I agree. Even more important because the website can be down, but business happens via email these days. And I know I have a lot of customers that are still on very poor quality email, or their email hosting is down, and people saying the email is down for the day. I don't know how people put up with that. I wouldn't put up with it. So for me, there's only really two choices when it comes to email hosting. One is Google, so Google Apps, which I think we've talked about.
Yep.
For a small business, or if you're an all Apple business, I think you can't beat Google Apps. Or the other alternative, if you're a Microsoft Outlook power user, or if you're all Windows, or you have a much bigger business that uses Microsoft Office, then Microsoft's Office 365 cloud service is probably the way to go. I don't think there's a choice outside those two, really.
No, look, there may be, but I think in terms of reliability and scale, and you can't sort of go past either of those.
Yeah, I know a lot of younger people in business, like people early 20s who complain about paying for email. So the Google Apps, the price for Google Apps, I think it's $5 a mailbox a month or $50 a year.
Yeah.
Back in the day when we had our IT company, we had 25 staff, and we had to spend thousands on email servers. I think we had a $10,000 server and then another $5,000 of software to run on top of that.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's, $5 a month plus. So we have an add-on service from backup of $5 for $3 a month to back up each mailbox.
Yeah. The youth of today, Brendan, seriously.
Young people, Ed, tell me.
It's terrible. This comes from a 33-year-old who's saying this, which is funny.
I'm 34 in a month and a half. Come on.
Oh, buddy. Well, I'm 47, so there you go. Okay, so that's awesome. So you personally, I know you use Google Apps.
Yep.
So what is it you like about Google Apps as opposed to Office 365?
So I'm all Mac, Apple, so
Yep.
I don't really use any Windows stuff.
Yep.
And I'm not an Outlook user, so I don't use Outlook at all. I don't use any of the...
That sends shivers down my spine when I hear the word Outlook. I haven't used it for 8 years or 9 years.
Yeah, same. If you're in a corporate environment, you need that shared calendar stuff and shared contact stuff, which it doesn't work reliably in Outlook unless you're using the Microsoft email service. So
yeah.
Because I don't use any of that, I like Google. I also like the Gmail web interface. I don't really like Microsoft's web interface. I think it's quite clunky and slow. Mm-hmm. And the other big thing is, with both these services compared to a more standard classic email hosting service, the email syncs across all your devices on both Office 365 and Google Apps. So if you read or delete an email on your mobile, it comes out of the inbox on your PC. I know I have clients that they have one set of email in their iPhone and then have another set in their computer, and they don't sync up. So that's a big productivity win. And that alone for me would be reason enough to move across to one of these cloud providers. Yeah,
that was an hallelujah moment when I sort of got all that sort of stuff happening. That was, it was one of those things. Particularly if you do any degree of travel, and the ease of managing your email wherever you are now is so much better than it ever used to be.
I still know people who are driving to the office to check email. I don't know what century are they living in, but
that's a seriously bad thing. I remember the days, I'd go away on holidays for a few weeks, and I didn't. I mean, I could probably have managed to get access logging into email through the web hosting service. It was very clunky and not set up properly, and then I'd get back and I'd have to check email. It was ridiculous. So
yeah, and I think email is probably one that is, particularly if you're a bigger business or you're more than a few people, it's one that's probably better managed by your IT guy or your IT company. And the main reason why I say that is because email is mission critical. So if it goes down, you need to be able to call someone to give you that support straight away. And I think that IT companies are better set up to give you that kind of real-time technical support versus a web company who don't. Web companies really more specialize in web and marketing stuff, and they're not really set up for technical support stuff. So most of the time, if a client asks me about email, I'll kind of try and get them to defer to their IT guy first before we will touch it, because I don't want to be taking calls at 10 o'clock at night when the email is broken for somebody or they can't download their email for whatever reason, whereas an IT company is set up to do that.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. So, there's quite a lot to consider, isn't there? I mean, it's not just a simple case of, $5 a month cheap hosting and that'll do it. You'll get a certain degree of systems and things happening with that, and you'll have a website that'll sort of work properly. But, you're very much limiting yourself to any future expansion or growth or reliability is probably more to the point.
Yeah, I think it's false economy. You might save $10 a month or $20 a month, but then you're going to spend that somewhere else. Things are going to be slow. You're not going to get, if the website's slow, you're not going to get as many customers, or even if you lose one new customer, then there's your savings lost. If your staff or you have to fiddle around with slow email or email that's broken or doesn't work, then you've just lost that in productivity. So, it's such a small cost to be worried about. And there's such a big performance difference between cheap hosting and good hosting that I don't think cost really should be much of a deciding factor when it comes to this. Unfortunately, it is. That's the way people do choose hosting, but that's probably the worst way to choose a hosting plan, I think.
Yeah, too true. So, anything else? We'll have links to all the different ones we mentioned in the show notes.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else other than just a general, don't ignore it. Like, you need to pay attention to it as if, if you had a server in your office, you'd give it some sort of attention. You'd care about the maintenance and management of it. I think because of this stuff, it's in the cloud or it's internet stuff, it often gets ignored until something's broken. So,
yeah,
just the broad takeaway is just know about these 4 components, know where they are, know who's responsible for managing them, and I think you'll be ahead of most of the pack, and you probably eliminate 90% of problems that you'd have with your hosting or web technology stuff.
Cool. All
Awesome.
right. Thank you, sir. I think
Thanks, mate.
we're done. We're sort of at the half-hour point. Unless there's anything else to add, I think we've touched on that one. We could certainly deep dive into several of those in more detail as we go down the path in some other episodes. But that's a good overview, and will give some people ideas of what to look for their web hosting and email hosting and DNS.
Awesome.
Thank you, sir. We'll speak to you next time. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And hopefully I won't have a nasally sounding voice next time.
I hope so too.
All right. Thanks, Brendan.
See ya.
See you, mate.
You've been listening to Business Marketing Show. You can find us at businessmarketingshow.com or on iTunes. Just look for Business Marketing Show.